All right, so today is Wednesday. Um, so Friday we'll take the midterm exam in class. So it'll just be it's 20 questions, or it's worth 50 points. It's 20 questions about half of them are multiple choice questions, about half of them are a short answer. They're often like, what is the output of this code or something like that. Um, And then there's two slightly longer programming questions. There are questions I think you should be able to do in like 10 minutes, sort of stuff. So not generally not as long as like the practice problems or something like that, or an assignment, but just some coding stuff. Um, it's all closed notes, closed book. So again, you just want to write the code out. You won't be using your NetBeans to write the code or anything like that. So again, and I don't worry about syntax in the stuff. You don't have to write code that perfectly compiles or anything like that. Just code that illustrates the point there and see how close you can get for that. So that's kind of the plan for the exam. And today, the idea was we just do review for the exam here. So last class, we kind of went through the first few units there, variables, printing out if-then statements, and then more complicated if-then statements. I think we skipped the switch statement, but that's in this review here. Again, we don't do a whole lot with the switch statement, but you should know what it is and what it does here. And then we get into loops. And so today I wanted to spend some time reviewing loops here and then methods. And methods are probably the hardest thing because again, we haven't used those that much yet here. So I find for loops and methods are the most recent things we've seen. So those might be good things to focus on. So I thought we'd maybe just go through some of these problems here. And walk through them, and then give you a chance to kind of maybe do some of the review problems or something like that. So again, I like to code while I'm doing this so I can run some code. So I'm gonna run NetBeans. So again, under like chapter unit 5, I guess, you know, we have these two loops. We have a while loop and a do while loop. When would we use one over the other? And like, here's our two examples. Here's a while, and then we have some condition. And if that condition is true, we go through that. But if that condition's not true, we skip over that. So again, if we can check our condition right away, and we may not want to go into the loop at all, then a while loop is good. If we never, there's a chance we may not want to do this at all, 0 times, a while loop is good. Now a do loop, you always say do, you do everything once. And then at the end, you check some condition. So if you have something you want to do every time, a do while loop is probably better. So like a typical example is play a menu and ask them at the end something there. So you always want to display the menu once and get some input from them. So often anything related to input or user's choice there, you might want to do that once at the end here. A while loop is more like maybe there's been some calculation done or we do some sort of stuff and we've got some values we figured and now we're going to process those values And we don't know, there might be no values in the list, there might be multiple values in the, or, that we want to process, and we're going to loop through those things here. So let's just try look at this code and see if we understand what it does. Now, one thing I'll note at times on here is that at times this code might display like a scanner and not have, consider in the exam, we'll often have these code segments here, and we won't have the main in there. And with the main, we often may not have a scanner. We might be using a scanner. Sometimes we'll try to tell you that, but you might see a scanner like this input that's not defined. And again, the idea is that that's just implied, because again, I don't want to dump a whole lot of code, just want to show you the important snippet that section I want. Similarly, the import for these is probably won't be shown often in the exam here. So again, we're just showing you this portion of the code, and it's implied that this section is already here, kind of. So, like, a typical exam question, I might give you this and say, describe what this code does, what will be the output of it. Or where would you use this code here? And again, so we set menu selection to 1. While menu selection does not equal 4, we print out, here's your menu of options, and we say, what option do you want 4 to quit? And then we read in an integer or menu selection. So again, the one key thing I want you to get is that, right, that it will repeat these 2 lines again and again and keep asking for inputs again and again. This loop means that we go through this section multiple times, right? So we're going to check this. If this is true, we're going to do this. When we get to the end here, we're going to check if that's true again. And if it is, we're going to do it again. We're going to keep doing that as long as this is true. And will it be true initially? Well, we initialize menu selection to 1, and that's not 4, so it will be true initially. So again, what does this do? Just ask, what option do you want? And again, I can enter any number here, and it does it again. And I enter a number, it does it again. Enter another number, it does it again. Keep going on until I hit 4, and then it'll quit. And the idea here is that, like, sometimes we might have a set of options here that we might want the user to do. So maybe 1, go for a walk. To go for a bike ride. Exercise. And again, Joe, you might have this menu of options that we want to display. And we want to do that. And it would keep displaying that menu of options again and again until the user hits 4. Oops. Now, one question would be, is this the best loop for this stuff? So we're using a while loop here. Is a while loop the best loop for this? And I would say not necessarily. Assuming we always want to display this menu, I would say a do while loop would be better. here. So you could certainly do this in a while loop. We have to do some initialization ahead of time here for this. And it's just not that bad. But again, I actually think you could do this. You know, how would you switch this from a while loop to a do while loop here? So I would switch this to do. Well, actually, let's do is I'd move the while part down to the bottom here to the end of the loop. And then where the while was, I put a do all this while, and I do need a semicolon there. Again, you can basically take the while condition and stick it to the end of the loop and do it that way. We just need to put in a little do to mark the beginning of the loop. And then again, this will work the exact same way. And when you hit 4, it'll quit. How's that seeming? Is that seeming old hat? You know, does that seem familiar to you? If not, you might want to review some while loops, go over some while loops a little bit, go over some do loops here, like this one here. We have, you know, do this. A typical example like this is when we're asking the user to enter something, and then we're repeating this until the user enters some legal value or something like this here. For this. So this would be an example of that. Let's put that up here. Here we're setting the user's choice to something. We're doing a do loop here, and we're just repeating this until the user enters, while the user is entering no here, or yeah, until the user, oh well, yeah, as long as the user enters no, we keep doing this here. I'm going to comment this part out here. So yeah, what does that code do? It says, are you happy yet? And if you say no, it says, oh, type would work better. I've been happy, no, I say no. It says, have a happy day. Are you happy yet? You say no. And then finally, you have to be happy. So then it'll quit. But you should look at examples like maybe we want to ask the user, maybe we just want to ask the user, how would we change this? So we ask, are you happy yet? Yes or no. And we keep repeating this as long as this, if the user doesn't enter either yes or no for this, how would we answer that? So again, we'd say, are you happy? Yes, no, read in the choice. And then we're going to keep repeating this until make sure they have to enter yes or no for this. How would we do that for this? One thing to look at is the way we're checking the choice. Again, these are strings. So we're using user choice dot equals or user choice dot equals ignore case. So we could ask if the user's choice is equal to no, or maybe we could ask if the user's choice is equal to yes. For that. And so we want to force them to enter yes or no. So if they enter something else unknown, it should keep asking them to enter. And now it doesn't. It actually is doing the opposite. Now if I say yes, oops, I say yes, it'll keep asking me. If I say no, it'll keep asking me until I enter something that's not yes or no. So this is doing the opposite of what I want it to do. I want them to keep doing this again and like, I mean, here. So how would I change this here? So there's not a user's choice does not equal. We can just do equals, but I can put a not here and a knot here for this. But this isn't going to quite do what I want it to do here. If I hit some garbage here, so it keeps going. But if I hit yes, it'll keep going. If I hit no, oops, if I hit no, there's no way to get out of this loop here. It'll go forever. Because it's always going to be true that it is not equal to no or not equal to yes. It's always going to, it's that. So I actually have to switch this to an and if I want this to work. There. And again, this sort of complexity of these ands and ors is probably, getting towards the further extent of what I'd expect on an exam there, but certainly something where I'd ask you to repeat a question. Maybe we'd ask the user to enter a positive number or a number less than 100 or something like that. And you would just keep asking your user to enter a number again and again. So, you can maybe come up with an example like that for this stuff. The other thing to work on is for loops. Make sure you understand the format of for loops. What are our counters? And again, you should, I suggest you go through and do another set of practice with for loops to get them doing what you want. So like you should know what is the output of this for loop. And what does that do? What is we say for, and we have three parts of this: the initialization, the check, and then the increment or the change update value. So what does this actually do? How many times is this going to print out count is, and what values is going to print out? So you should be certainly familiar enough with for loops to do something like this here in your head. So yeah, what is this going to print out? It's going to print out, it's going to set count equal to 1 and print count is 1. And it's going to then add count 1. This plus plus adds 1 to count here. So it'll be 2, 3, 4. So it'll be count is 1, count is 2. And it's print lines. So they're each on a separate line. Count is 1. Next line, count is 2. And how long do we keep going? Do we do 4? So at some point, we'll print off 3, count will be 3, we'll print it off, make it 4, and we'll loop up. Then count will be less than, will not be less, it'll be equal to 4. So I don't think it should print off 4. It should just print off 1, 2, 3, right? So if I run this, I should just see count equals 1, count equals 2, count equals 3. And again, play with this, change it in some different ways. Does this do anything different here? Maybe I'll get rid of this. If I say count equals count plus 1 there. What if I make this less than or equal to 4? What does that do? What happens if I go count is greater than 4? What does that do here? So why don't you spend some time doing some review with some of these loops for us. Try them out. Again, unit 5 and 6 are all on loops. Why don't you play that? You might want to do some of the review exercises. Remember, there's the practice problems for unit 5. Those are a bunch of these loops. And 6 is there's a bunch of for loop examples. That you might want to try out here. Again, remember the practice problems are kind of more complicated than, well, they are more complicated than any of the things we will do on the exam, but again, they might be worth practicing here. So why don't you spend some time doing that, and I'll come around, and if you get stuck or have any questions, I can help answer that. I'm going to break in again for just a little bit and talk about the last unit, unit 7 on methods for that. So again, one thing you want to review is, well, there'll be a couple questions about using methods here, what methods are used. why we use methods. And remember, we talked about a couple reasons for why we use methods. Often we have duplicate code, code that's exactly the same or very similar, and then we can move that to the method. If you remember the hokey pokey, we had the refrain, which was always exactly the same. We could just stick that in a method. We also had each verse, which was very similar. We could put that in a method, but again, there were slightly differences, so we had to pass a parameter to it. So it could remember the body part, the right body part each time for that. We also use methods just to kind of organize our code more. We just had our software design class, our advanced one. We took this code that's about this long and on one big method, and we break it up into 5 smaller methods just so it's better organized and has a little better structure and name, and we can, understand it a little better. It's kind of the same way that you might look at a book, and a book is broken up into chapters or paragraphs and things like that, just to organize it better. So you can look at a method like this, how would you call a method? So if I had that method here, print stars, how would I call this method from my main program here? So again, you just call the print stars method, the name of the method, and then you put parentheses there. Now, if it has parameters here, you have to specify that. So it's looking for an integer for the number of stars. So I could just put in an integer here and say print stars with 5 stars. That would print off. If I run this, it should print off 5 stars. Prints off my 5 stars here. If I say print stars 10, it'll print off 10 stars. So whatever I say here. Now I can also have a variable. So if I ask the user how many stars they want, how many stars? And I read that into some variable, an integer variable, user stars equals input next int. So I ask the user to enter how many stars and read that into a variable. I can use that. Instead of saying always 10, I can use user stars there also, right? And now when I run it, it'll ask how many stars, and I can say I want 3 stars, and it'll print off 3 stars. And again, that's because there's the way I call this depends on this parameter here. Now, if there isn't a parameter, what would happen if I didn't have this parameter here? Let's say, here, let's make a new method. Let's make a new method. So or I could ask you, how would I change this method so that it had no parameters and always did 5 stars, always printed 5 stars out, or 10 stars. So maybe I'll call this print 10 stars, or print 10 stars. And I always wanted to print off 10 stars here. So now I have a for loop in here, and I want to do that for loop maybe 10 times always. So if I want to call this sort of method that says print 10 stars, how would I do that? And again, I would just call that up here on a line by itself. Let me comment this out here. I'd just say print 10 stars, and it would just print off 10 stars. And again, since this has no parameters, when I call this, it should have no parameters for this. Where again, if I want to print off this one, if I wanted to use it here, if I wanted to call out print stars, that has a parameter here for the number of stars. And so I'd want to call it with, again, it's looking for an integer, and I'm putting an integer here. Does that seem familiar? Does that seem understandable? Any questions on that? Now, the other thing we have to watch is what happens. These are all void functions here. So it'll be, to tell you the truth, sometimes I put private and sometimes I put public. And in your world, it doesn't matter. You can use private or public and it doesn't matter. Eventually, it will matter. And again, in my advanced class, yeah, we have to pick one or the other, and there's rules for that. But in your world, it doesn't matter. So it's always going to be private. It's going to be public or private. It doesn't matter. It's always going to be static. And again, if it's void, that means you can call it on a line by itself. It doesn't return. It doesn't have a return value. What about this method here? If I wanted to do this method, this method is private static int. It returns an integer and it finds the maximum of two numbers. How would I find that? So again, I want to find the maximum between these two numbers. How would I do that? So if I wanted to try to print out, maybe I do a system out print line. The larger number is, and I want to print off the larger number here. I can call this method right from within like a print statement. I can say the max of, what did I want? It needs two numbers, an A and a B number. So I'm going to specify 1123. And what's the other number? 1098. So again, this will print off the larger of those two numbers. So now I'm calling this, I can call it within like a print statement like this here, and I'll do it. I can also call, save this. Maybe I want an integer variable called the largest. And I'm going to call max with these values again. And then I could then print off the largest. So I could call it here. I can also do it this way and do it this way. But again, the main thing is that if your method is not void and it has a return, you should be calling that method either on the right side of an assignment statement or expression, or like in a print statement or something like that. Because it's going to take on, what we do is we'll send these values down here, we'll do this calculation, and it will return a value so that this will be evaluated as an expression, and it'll be an integer expression. This is like an integer here. It's the largest of these two numbers here. So again, we can save it in another integer variable. We haven't done much with these methods, so again, it might be worthwhile to do that. So again, at the end here, some questions. So these are some kind of short essay-like or questions, concept questions. Here's some predict the output type questions that are up there. You might be asked to write a code snippet, like here, write Java code that declares an integer variable age, initializes to your age, and then prints out the value. So you should, that's a really quick 2 lines of code probably that you can do for this. So you can write some small sections of code, or what's the output of this stuff. So you should be able to go through some of those things. There's also some sample prompts here for AI. AI is really good at creating review problems. So if you want to come up with some other review problems, you might want to ask AI for those. You should just remind AI that you're, doing a beginning exam or a beginning Java programmer. So we have some sample codes here, so, okay. I'll let you keep doing your reviews and I'll answer any questions you have.